Well, hello, I'm Christine Nicholas with People Science, and welcome to our webinar, We Furloughed or Laid Off, What's Next? Good morning to the West Coast, and I hope you're having good lunch in the Midwest, and I am here live with a few of other colleagues here in New Jersey, where it is, at this point, seldom sunny and always 52 degrees. So I hope you're in a better climate to be restricted at home. I'd like to thank the community of ours that's growing. I'd like to thank you for your interest, and I'd really like to thank you for supplying us with the questions and saying, hey, this is what we want to learn about, because that's really what these are about, these webinars are about. And the panel today, I think, is really astounding. I'm happy to introduce them. First, let me start with Jess Oberto. You know who she is, right? Raise your hand there, Jess. So Jess, if you're part of our community, if you're new, by the way, welcome. I know we have several new people on. Jess is in charge of process engineering at People Science, and she's going to pull the reins in and talk to us a lot today about steps that we can take. Next is Lindsay Roundtree. Lindsay's director of recruiting. Lindsay and Jess partner on a lot of things, so they'll have some things to contribute today. Here we are with Zach Goldberg, especially our new community knows Zach. Zach is the guy who runs interference, keeps us all straight and tells us what the topics should be, and then interfaces. So he's usually your first lead into us. I'm really excited to introduce to Kevin Horan. Kevin and I met, I'm not even gonna say how long ago. Okay, right now.
Thank you.
Kevin, and we were just talking about this. This is Kevin's actual title. It's VP Corporate Soul, HR in parentheses, at JSX and Jet Suite. I thought of Kevin for this because the term furlough is so seldom used in the private sector. And I know that Kevin has a great history in the airline industry, which does use the term furlough, right?
Does, yes.
Yeah, so I think from a firsthand basis, I think Kevin's gonna be able to shed a lot of light. And then last but certainly not least is Lisa Reibold. Lisa is a stellar, and I will say brilliant mind in labor, a labor attorney for Clark Hill. You know, I happened to meet Lisa when I was working with some clients, and there were 3 litigators, top names involved. Brought Lisa in because we needed somebody on the ground in California, and she blew the other guys out of the water with her knowledge. So anybody who's looking for a labor attorney, you got to call Lisa. She's at Clark Hill. That's my plug for you, Lisa, because I'm like, I don't plug anybody, but really a good mind in labor. And I think anybody in labor law in California becomes a authority for so many things because of you know, the laws are so stringent there. So today we're going to take, I'm going to talk a little bit and ask the group to join in about what we're seeing and hearing right now and how that applies, of course, to us in human resources and talent acquisition and workforce planning and our whole industry. Then we're going to jump right into, you know, you've laid off or you're getting ready to lay off or furlough. How should you be managing the aftermath of this? What are the key things that you can do now to make a difference there? And then we'll talk about how to stay ahead of the curve as things are changing, which is a really good segue into today. So on the panel, has everybody heard the big number for today? 4.4 million people, right? You know, the good news about that number is that it is declining week over week, the amount of people claiming unemployment. I think the more concerning and where we really want to take a look as we examine our own corporations is of that 4.4 number, it's now gravitated over towards professional services. So it's moving away from hospitality and some of the, you know, more easily to understand what's considered, you know, non-essential workers. It's now moving into professional services, media, and the public sector. So staying ahead of the curve means watching that number and watching as it changes. You know, people used to ask me in 2008, how do we weather that storm and get through it? And I think I said this to Wilton Cup last week, right, Jess? Like, we were able to put blinders on and say, where do we go with the business? The tough thing with COVID, and Kevin and I were just talking about this, is it's more reminiscent. But no, there's nothing like this ever, right? But we do at these points in time say, as an organization, people science for 24 years knows how to scale up, scale down. And now the term that we're using is how do we scale back in? So we're used to being a part of those decisions. Our community, all of you, many of you are used to being a part of that. So we all have a grasp on how that happens. But when you inject the emotion of fear on top of that, not only are the markets losing crazy, the predictables go down because we do, the fear comes from all these unknowns and we really don't know things. So some of the things that we're hearing in the news today about, how blood pressure medicines are effective because blood clotting is now an issue. I mean, these things that you think we should have known a month ago, all of a sudden, this is such a disguised disease that we're finding out. So I think it's important to stay plugged in, especially human resource people, but at the same time, take time to make sure that you back out and don't take it personally and try not to become too involved, because if we get too enclosed, we miss opportunities for our businesses, A, to sustain themselves, and B, to go even further and grasp opportunities. These down sessions really are a tremendous opportunity for human resources. And if you look back, Kevin, love to get your take on this too. But if you look back, it's these kind of events that have brought HR further and further to the table or the boardroom.
Yeah, no, I would agree completely. And it's where HR people are really challenged sometimes to show skills beyond what executives think of as the touchy-feely side of HR, but to be able to come in and add that value on the cost and financial side to talk about the impact of the actions that executives think they need to take. And often that impact can cause them to change course, as was the case for the approach that we took at JSX, one of the two brands that I help with as a shared services between two different companies at JetSuite and JSX. On the JetSuite side, we call it JSI, sorry. On the JetSuite side, that's a on-demand charter carrier. They operate like a NextJet or a FlexJet or an ExoJet, if you're familiar with the space. And we immediately saw a big downtick, which surprised, I think, the industry in a whole in demand. We thought that perhaps with this private flying would come back stronger, and it did not. And so we had to make some tough decisions, and we did. And along those lines, we followed a traditional aviation path. So we made the decision to set that fleet of aircraft down, and we followed the traditional aviation path of furlough. And the reason we did that is, as opposed to doing something different, is A, the demand wasn't there, so we needed to park the fleet. But then how we were going to treat our crew members was important to us. And in the aviation industry, you spend so much money in recruiting and training, specifically in pilots, and that was the bulk of the workforce at JetSuite. The aircraft were so small that we had a management and sales team and then pilots. There are no flight attendants or ground crews or anything like that. So to protect that investment, we chose a furlough with the ability to call them back in the hopes that as demand comes back and we take aircraft out, we can quickly get people back and not lose that investment. But on the JSX side, we took a very different approach. And JSX to the public looks like a regional airline, like an American Eagle or a Continental Express when they were around. It is a small aircraft operator on the West Coast. Big plans this year to expand it, but those have obviously been put on hold. But it operates like a regular airline, but out of our own private facilities. And we decided to take a very different approach there because we do have such aggressive expansion plans and aircraft in the pipeline, and we were seeing huge demand for our product as it was growing. We, like every other carrier, had to cut back our product, and we cut it back by about 75%, but we are still operating it on the West Coast because it sort of lends itself to the COVID-19 pandemic just in the type of product it is. We operate out of private facilities, smaller aircraft, fewer opportunities for touch, great social distancing. But with that reduction in flying, we obviously had a related reduction in staff. But we took our time in making our decision as to how we were going to handle this. We actually even took our time in cutting back our schedule because we didn't want to be the market leader here because we are known as sort of an anomaly within the industry. And as we sat to make our decision and look at what major carriers and regional airlines were doing and watching actually regional airlines like Compass and Transstates and Raven file for bankruptcy and go out of business, we wanted to make certain that we protected our investments, that investment being our people. One of our cultural tenets is that we take care of each other. So we kept that in mind as we sat as a leadership team and took a decision. And our decision overall was that we weren't going to let anybody go. That instead we were going to find a way to keep everybody employed if it was on reduced hours or if we were paying them to stay home. and using them potentially on special projects. Because as you think about it, the bulk of the employees or crew members that we were dealing with were pilots, and it costs us on average $35,000 per pilot to hire and train them. Our flight attendants, and it costs us on average $10,000 per flight attendant to recruit, hire, and train them. And then our airport agents, which have a smaller investment, closer to probably around $2,500, but are the lifeblood. They're the ones that need to be there even when the planes aren't operating. So our approach was, after looking at the cost of replacement, looking at the time to replace in an industry where pilot shortage has been talked about for decades and continues to be talked about, even though there probably will be furloughs or layoffs that create a bit of a surplus in the short run. That replacement cost and replacement time was going to majorly impact the market, our market agility, in that we believe, and the data out there shows, that regional travel will come back first. So we want to be able to get our people back in line and going as quickly as possible. So we came up with options for our crew members. There are a limited number that we need to continue to work. And so we promised if they chose to have the continue to work on our flight ops side, there was a certain number that we need, and we would pay them what we guarantee what we will pay them. For others who decided that for whatever reasons, family, societal, because they were scared of the disease, that they didn't want to work, but didn't want to be laid off either, because we weren't offering that as a position, we gave them a reduced schedule where we actually paid them a little more than half of their pay and told them, you know what, stay home. And if the demand comes back and we need you, we'll reactivate you at full pay. But on that partial pay, if you get a little stir crazy, and we found that they have, we have lots of projects, and we'll take volunteers based on your expertise to try and keep them engaged with the organization. And then the third option that we put out there was, if you want to take unpaid time off, we'll allow that as well in increments all the way up through the end of July. And we picked that time very strategically, because with that announcement, we also added a bit of explanation. And our explanation was this: if you do take unpaid time off, we're not going to contest if you choose to apply for unemployment. We're not going to tell you which decision to make, but we'd also like you to be aware that the federal government stimulus has added to that unemployment equation on an average of $600 per week. If you go into your state unemployment site and take a look at what your unemployment offering would be and add that $600 to it, that might be more advantageous to you than coming to work on a limited schedule. But it's your decision. We will make a position available for you either way. And we provided them with the information, the links, all the data to be able to go out and make the decision that was best for them and their family or their personal situation. And at the end of that, we found that about 30% of our crew members took unpaid time off. And trust me, they've been filing for the unemployment because it's keeping my team busy responding to those unemployment inquiries. But it's been encouraging to see how we've been able to bring down our numbers and actually operate the way we need to operate, but address each individual as an individual and not force a decision on them by forcing them into a furlough or layoff situation, but say, hey, here's a suite of options. Here's what you can choose, what works best for you, and we'll work with you, as well as keeping them informed along the way. So we've continued, even for those who are on unpaid time off, we have departmentally, they have weekly meetings with all of their staff to let them know what's going on with the organization, what government aid we've applied for, what our loads look like, where we're seeing green sheets in demand, so that and what we're considering. We talk about corporations that are contacting us about corporate shuttles just to keep them involved. But at the same time, we've also continued recruiting, because we know that on the backside of this, there is going to be demand. And while we're getting a lot of great social media around how we're treating our crew members, we want to take advantage of that so that we can become even more attractive to those who are considering a career in aviation, which is a very competitive field to get into. And with those applicant pools, we've continued interviewing, particularly on the pilot, the flight attendant, the airport, and the maintenance side. But we've also been very honest with them. As we take them through the interview process, we say, look, you know what's going on in the news. We're only going to take this so far, and then we're going to hold you, but we will keep in touch with you. And so my recruiters on my team are doing monthly meetings with everybody in their pool, where they're doing Zoom meetings like this, or Google Hangout, or whatever your media may be, and talking about the state of the industry and the state of the company to keep people engaged and excited. And we continue to do that as well with anybody who's interested, who has come through our process, to let them know that we still care and we're still interested. And it was interesting, we were on a call, I was on the flight attendant call, which was just last week. We had a group of about 40 flight attendant candidates, we'll call them, sitting there on the phone. And we went through what was going on with the company and what we anticipated happening going forward. And then we opened it up for questions. And the first question was not a question, but a comment from a gentleman who was applying to be a flight attendant. Said he had been applied and had offers from 3 other carriers, but he was giving them up. 2 of them being major airlines, and we're very small compared to that, because they clearly didn't care about him. They had called him and told him he'd been put on hold and he hadn't heard anything, but yet he was getting regular emails from us, calls from us, taking advantage of social platforms like Canvas to get email blasts out and flash emails and texts to just let them know who we are and that we're still there and we're still interested, which all has been great in keeping the applicant pool going. And in terms of our crew members who are staying with us and are working, we're also taking that opportunity to celebrate milestones. So we had our 4th anniversary on Sunday, and we had a birthday party in all of our stations and our locations. Our first day that our sales exceeded our refunds, we had a party within our stations and did a Zoom call with everybody who was working from home. And this was this week, we had our first aircraft that was completely full. And so we celebrated that with everybody to show the positive that things are coming back. So I think that, as we think about it and we think about what we've done at JSX in particular, the focus on, I think, being successful coming through this is to keep people engaged regardless of their decision, give them options, give them data, let them make the decision, because that way they're ultimately in control of what's going on. I think it's the loss of control that everybody's feeling during these quarantine orders and stay-at-home orders, that the more control you can give somebody back, the better they feel about it. And I think that's going to work wonders for us in the long run. We'll see at the end of the day. Hopefully it pays off the way we think it's going to. But it's certainly a different approach for aviation. And having spent 35 plus years in aviation, it's encouraging to see the positive side of what traditionally could be seen as a negative, and see how that's playing out with crew members individually.
Wow. Maybe new to aviation, but not new to you, because you can really see how you're ahead of the curve. I just want to dismantle a couple of things in here. Sure. And have everybody comment on them. But I also, to the audience, we're getting your questions, we're putting them together. A lot of them are going to be answered as we go along, but we will make sure to circle back before the end of the webinar if we miss anybody. The first thing I want to touch on is, if you notice when Kevin started speaking, one of the first things he talked about, and this got me yesterday, because we really only had like 5 minutes yesterday, he knew exactly what his cost per hire was. So when we look at where we are right now in the scheme of things, knowing what your cost per hire is really important. If you haven't done the math, if you need a calculator, if you don't know how to do it, see Zach, raise your hand, Zach. Zach's sending an email out. We're giving free consultations on this, on how to do that. Right now is when you really want to know that. The second metric that I'm going to bring up is cost of vacancy. Not as commonly heard. Crucial. And I will tell you, through the last 2 downturns, cost of vacancy has made such a difference in organizations when they look at which departments bring the biggest value, even which departments should be outsourced, which departments really just need more attention. And what's funny about cost of vacancy, no matter how many times we've worked with clients on this, it's always a surprise to us and them. So cost of vacancy tells you how much would it cost Kevin if he didn't have that pilot in the seat, right? So it puts those ingredients together. In fact, we typically suggest that you work with finance, because it's kind of like a profit and loss statement per position. But if it costs $35,000 to attain a pilot, what is the profitability that pilot brings in the long run? And then, so if we disseminate that into days, how much is it costing every day that position is open? So as you move towards furloughing, you move towards laying off, this is really good information that you can bubble up and get you to the table so that you're part of the discussion of what's next. Organizations, just like Kevin's talking about, are looking at how do we morph our company, because most of us have to morph. I mean, we're not going to look like what we did before this. Nothing's going to be the same after this. So some companies might change a little bit. Some companies might change altogether. Some companies may not be there anymore. HR at this point can play a critical part in that by saying, these positions bring this much, so we need to invest here. And maybe these are positions we need to outsource or should go away. So those 2 metrics, really, really important. I love the fact that you brought up empathy and understanding. And Kevin, it's really remarkable that that you really knew to do this. you know, as we've been counseling clients across the country, you know, somebody's laid off in Mississippi gets an entire, if we forget the $600 stimulus, gets an entirely different amount than somebody laid off in Tennessee. The formulas for New Jersey, we were talking to Lisa about this, the formulas in California, it's a flat rate, Lisa, for unemployment typically.
It maxes out at 450. So if you would have lost at least the 450, you can max out at that per week. So you get 450 per week in California, comparative to somewhere like Florida, which is I think 250 per week. So tack on the extra 600, but there's still a $200 per week difference in California max versus Florida max.
And it's really important to know that number in the states that you're in for multiple positions, because if you tack that $600 on, bringing somebody back to work, asking them to take a 20% pay cut, and then having them do 75% of a job they've never done before, you could lose this critical worker. There's never been a time that's more important for us, is there really? I mean, we need to know the metrics. We need to understand the value and how that value translates to each employee, because everybody's circumstances are different. Any thoughts about, is that scary? Do I have to know what every single employee is gonna, you know, what the merit for them to come and go is? Nobody wants to talk about it. Right?
Well, we were very lucky. We are very lucky in that we operate in a limited geography. So we didn't have to take a look at 50 states. We took a look at about 6. And we did, you know, very similar to what Lisa was talking. We just sort of used, you know, what the basic average members were. And then we provided our crew members, and we call everybody a crew member. I'm sorry if I keep saying that, but we don't have employees. We're all crew members. We provided the crew members with the formula for them to be able to go do their own math, and told them where to go do the research. So you provide the tools, but you don't necessarily provide the answer, and make yourself available on the backside to help them with questions. And I think that's how our 30% got to the decisions that they got to, is they took a look and did the math and were thankful and went, oh, wow, yeah, it does make more sense for me to take this option. And it, you know, worked in our favor, and it's working in their favor, which is the more important thing.
Awesome. You know, as the PPP loans and the stimulus packages, that's another consideration that I have down here you really want to take a look at as far as how the business is being affected. There was an article today in one of the papers about a company, a smaller company, maybe seven or 8 different massage locations, well-being locations. And she was so happy that she, as the CEO, she had received her PPP loan, got on the phone with their employees, and they were irate. They were making more money staying home. They felt safer there at this point. You know, so I think really understanding the effect that has, especially as Jess and Lindsay start to talk about transparency in your brand, how important they are. The other thing that I will add to this before we just turn the reins over is, you know, everything keeps changing. So the virus itself keeps changing what we're doing. You know, you hear some of these White House briefings where they're like the virus is dictating where we're going. It kind of still is. So as these new discoveries come out, because we don't know about it, that causes the markets to look different. It causes opportunities, like whoever knew GM could be taking car parts and turning them into ventilators. So as these things start to morph and change, I think as professionals, it's important for us to stay ahead of that curve, look at how it affects our population, and bubble it up corporate wise. So Jess, you want to take the reins from here?
Yes, thank you. Okay, so I thought it would be good to start out with really talking about furlough versus layoff. I know furlough seems to be a new term we're using more frequently with the COVID crisis, but there's a little bit of confusion there still. So we've asked Lisa, as our legal counsel for today, to jump in and kind of help clarify things a bit before we get a little bit deeper.
Sure. So specifically when it comes to furloughs and layoffs, it's a state-by-state analysis that needs to be done to determine if there is actually any difference between a furlough and a layoff in your particular state. Traditionally, a furlough is a situation where an employee is put on an unpaid leave of absence, but is still considered an employee of the company. Some companies elect to do that in order to keep employees on benefits, to allow them to still use their accrued and unused vacation and PTO days. In a state like California, where I'm located, there is no statute or case law that actually recognizes furloughs as a legitimate thing to put your employee into. As such, the only authority actually that we have is a Department of Industrial Relations opinion letter from 1993, where a company had put out an employee on an unpaid leave of absence for a duration of time. That 1993 opinion letter came back and stated that any unpaid leave of absence without a return date within the same payroll period would be considered a termination. Now, an industrial relations opinion letter is not binding authority on the courts, but it is looked at as persuasive, and it's the only current authority we have here in California. As such, we've been advising clients that in the event you are in California and you are putting employees out on unpaid leaves of absence, that you need to look at those as potentially being viewed as terminations, in which case that in California triggers final wage obligations to pay out their final wages and pay out their accrued and unused PTO upon giving them notice of the leave of absence. That certainly triggers and raises questions on how do we treat them then for health insurance benefits? And again, this is a case-specific analysis that employers have to make. You have to contact your brokers and speak with your insurance companies to find out what your options are for health insurance benefits for your employees while they're out on a layoff or a furlough. Many of the insurance companies have been providing extensions to the periods of time that are listed in their contracts and giving employers additional time to keep those employees on benefits. The last thing you want to do with employees you're hoping to bring back is to cut off their health insurance benefits when we're in the middle of a public health crisis, when they may need to be going and getting health insurance benefits and you are taking away their health benefits. So one of the things that many employers are doing are assuring their employees that they are keeping them on their health insurance benefits to the full extent possible. So that is certainly an inquiry that you can make. It's something that you should relay to your employees that are being furloughed or laid off, what the insurance companies are allowing you to do, how long you can keep them on the benefits, and if you are, assure them that you are giving them the full extent possible of those health insurance benefits so that they at least see you as an employer who's going out of their way to give them the most that you can out of those benefits. Now, some of the states that do allow furloughs, such as Pennsylvania, there's been some public debate going on there as to whether or not you can stop those employees from using their sick leave while they're out on a furlough or a layoff. In Pennsylvania, where you can have layoffs and furloughs, many employers were choosing to lay off their employees so they didn't have to pay out those sick leave benefits. In Philadelphia, the government spoke out and found that they said it was unlawful for the employers there to choose layoffs just to prevent the employees from getting access to their paid sick leave that they had accrued and didn't have a right to be paid out on. So there are certainly considerations on whether you want to extend the paid sick leave benefits to employees that you are laying off or furloughing, and looking at your individual jurisdictions to determine if there's any obligation to either pay out or continue to extend those benefits while the employees are on the furloughs or layoffs. Another consideration that many employers didn't think about is whether these furloughs or layoffs triggered WARN obligations. So the WARN Act is a statute at the federal level, but there are also 20 states that have mini WARN Act statutes as well. The WARN Act requires that if you are deemed a covered establishment, and it varies whether you're looking at federal versus state, that you have to provide 60 days advance notice that the employees that there's going to be a layoff. At the federal level, we're talking about 75 individuals in a particular covered establishment. In the state of California, our mini WARN Act statute is for 50. So if you have, it's 100 at the federal level, 75 at the state. But if you have a layoff of 50 or more people, it would trigger the WARN Act. Now, at the federal level, there is an unforeseen business circumstances that gets you as an exception to providing that 60 days notice. It does, however, still require notice. So if you have furloughed or laid off individuals and you fall into one of those qualified establishments, you should still send notice and comply with the statute, even though you can't provide advance notice, to make sure that you're complying with the statute to the extent possible. And then lastly, I'd just say as to the furloughs and layoffs, just be cautious on who you're selecting to furlough and lay off, and just be conscious of the potential for wrongful termination claims. I've actually already received 2 demand letters from plaintiffs' attorneys that are claiming unlawful discrimination based on their clients being the individuals selected for the layoffs. as opposed to other people who were not selected. This is ripe for claims for age discrimination, gender discrimination, and race or disability discrimination. We have to be really careful, especially if we know individuals have medical conditions. Oftentimes, those are the people that don't want to be going into the office. So it makes logical sense to maybe approach those people to say, would you rather we lay you off as opposed to keeping you in here if you're concerned about your health? We have to be very cautious to make sure that we're not targeting individuals with medical conditions, though. So we can engage in the interactive process, but we don't want to target and push people with medical conditions out of the workplace, especially if that's going to open the door up for some potential claims.
We have a question that came in too, Lisa. The question is, can you reduce pay as a method of furlough, but not reduce the number of hours worked? In other words, reduce pay and expect employees to work 5 days a week.
Absolutely. There's nothing that stops you from reducing pay on individuals so long as you're maintaining minimum wage. And so long as if you have exempt employees that you're continuing to maintain the exempt threshold for to keep their exempt status. So if you have exempt employees, you want to make sure that you're complying with those twice the minimum wage requirements, depending on which state you're in, and always making sure you're paying an individual minimum wage.
Cool.
Great. Thank you, Lisa. So once you've gotten to the point where you've conducted the furloughs or layoffs, what do you do with the employees there? Obviously, you want to keep them engaged if you're planning on bringing them back. Some people might be eager and ready to get back to work. You may have some employees that need the assurance that the direction of the company is going upward, that their safety concerns are going to be addressed. And they may even have concerns that their positions may have changed just due to business changes after COVID. So it's really important to make sure that you're, one, communicating periodically. So I know Kevin had mentioned at JSX, they had Zoom meetings and things like that, just to keep those people that are no longer in the workplace tuned in to the happenings of the company. And as well as showing them that they're still valued. And again, Kevin, I think you're doing an amazing job at JSX doing that. And some of the things that we've seen companies do are, one, with those communications, of course, having a point of contact for the people that are no longer in the workplace, making sure they know who to go to for questions about benefits, that they know they have an EAP program if those are available, and making sure that the updates are tailored for content that they're going to appreciate and understand. So it could be specific to their department or location. And of course, always being brief and passive in nature. There are legal considerations in communicating with those furloughed employees. You don't want anything to be construed as work to them. So making sure that there's no call to actions there. And of course, if you have a legal team or department, running those communications by them as well, just as a safeguard. Another great way, I think, and Kevin, you may have mentioned it, showing them how they're valued. Some companies are sharing non-working opportunities with their teams that have been furloughed. So if there are volunteer opportunities, free professional development opportunities or trainings, of course, we don't want these to be considered work, but it's showing that you're still interested in their professional development and that you're looking at them as a valued employee. Does anyone else have anything that they've seen happen between their companies and their employees during this time to keep them engaged?
I'm seeing a lot of our clients making sure that they're keeping different tools available, even though employees have been furloughed, and not necessarily to keep the communication there for, you know, them and their furloughed employees or their laid off employees, but just something to help the employees feel connected to their own family members. So for example, a lot of people are giving virtual tools so people can stay connected to their families since they can't actually go visit them. So we're seeing that too, something that makes you feel good and makes you feel connected, not only to the company you've been furloughed from, but the family that you're missing so dearly.
Right. And I think this is important to remember that people will forget what you said. They might forget what you do, but they'll never forget how you made them feel. So even though this is an unfortunate situation and they're being furloughed, being able to communicate that they're still valuable to the company, that you still care about them, I think is a game changer. And as well as communicating with your furlough team, I think it's important to make sure that you have open communication about what's going on with your employees that are still working either remotely or at the workspace, because it's important for them to know the rules as well. So they're not reaching out to these people that aren't currently working and trying to follow up and get information and, engaging them in work as well. So keeping everyone up to date and transparency, I think, is key in this case.
I don't think we can skirt over the isolation factor either. It's one thing to be out of work and to be thinking, oh, I'll be coming back. Kevin, you said this yesterday, I'm going back next week, the week after. But that really is the headset. I'm going to be coming back soon. And then, it creeps up, and a lot of people are alone. There's nobody in their residence with them, or they've got kids all over the place, and they're trying to figure out how they're going to handle that. The isolation factor on this is huge. And I think that, many people relied on their job for the social experience. In fact, we have clients that refuse to do work from home for many years because the sociality of the whole thing is core to who they are as an organization. So this is a huge change for people. And it is true, out of sight, out of mind. Those days go on, and they can be long.
My office actually started doing, because my law firm is a large law firm, and we have had, unfortunately, a number of staff members that were laid off, and we had to make them layoffs in California. We're anticipating they will come back, but they're layoffs. But we have been doing Zoom coffee hours. So every day, anyone can join the Zoom coffee hour, and they've set it up like speed dating. So you actually get put into these various rooms, and they mix everyone up, staff, partners, associates, everyone that are still working. And they switch it every so many minutes, and it switches up who's in your room to just sort of keep in touch with people and talk to people that you wouldn't otherwise talk to. But we did make the conscious decision not to include the laid off employees, because in California, it's so risky here to engage them even in a social environment for those coffee hours, that there was concern that they would feel pressured for some type of job security to come back, that they'd need to engage in the coffee hours. So you have to be a little bit cautious depending on your state, on how your state would respond to even having social events opened up to the furloughed employees.
Great point.
It's a slippery slope when you're engaging people that are furloughed and laid off. It is a slippery slope. You've got to be careful, but at the same time, you don't want to miss the opportunity to stay in touch with them. If you have a third party, People Science acts as a third party. If you don't have a third party, you might want to consider a third party, because I know for our clients, we can keep them warm. We can give them updates. We can, help bring some unity around things as a third party provider. So that's a thought that you can have. Just a consideration.
Okay.
There's some cool technologies out there that we've been looking at too. House Party is one of them. I know Facebook has some different kinds of parties that you can do to facilitate these things, not just for the current, but for the furloughed and laid off employees. So there's technology that can help put those things together and maybe remove you from it a little bit, more of the legalities too.
Okay.
So another important thing to keep in mind is through this crisis is watching your brand in the market. So through social media outlets, your careers website, one, being realistic and acknowledging the crisis. And then with that, being able to show what you're doing to help the community and your employees. So if you're doing food drives, if you're allowing for remote work options, flexible work schedules, whatever new health and safety initiatives you're doing now to promote the safe working conditions and social distancing in your work environment. And of course, workarounds and what you're doing to make sure you're following the state, county, city regulations that have been enacted. I think being able to broadcast that and, finding a common ground, because we're all going through this, we're all dealing with it in different ways. But as well as you're doing that, being able to show compassion and sensitivity. So to those people that are at home and not working, making sure that all of your social media is crafted in consideration of those facing challenges during the crisis. So sometimes if you're coming across as business as usual, happy-go-lucky. There's people out there that are suffering and that are very distressed. So being compassionate to that, I think, is an important key. With that, being authentic and real. So being able to say, yes, our company is facing challenges. This is how we're handling them head on. We're all dealing with this new normal, as we're calling it. Some people are working from home with kids, dogs, spouses at the kitchen table. It's not easy. But being able to show how you're still pushing through, people that are being affected are still being able to work. I saw a commercial this week, and there is a man sitting at his kitchen table with his laptop, bouncing a baby on his knee. So, you know, if your CEO is doing that or your upper management's doing that, be real and show that. I think, again, people appreciate the authenticity and knowing that you're struggling too. Keep in mind that a lot of the times your candidates are your customers as well. And, you know, you may have some people that are going to come back after these furloughs when things get back to normal, but you may have to recruit new people to your company. So throughout this crisis, being able to represent your brand in a positive light, but being transparent and true as well, I think will build you a lot of creed in the market.
I think understanding too, it's hard when you're unemployed. You know, right now it's like, okay, everybody's suffering from COVID. But the truth is, there's probably about 130 million people working, right? So even if we hit 30% unemployment, there's still 70% of the population that is working. You know, we're just talking about this niche, but if you think of it from an applicant's perspective or from an employee's perspective and they're laid off, they're going to bump into people that are going to say, hey, things are just fine here. You know, and I'm still working. And, you know, that causes even more alarm and discontent. So keeping in mind that there's still a big part of the population that's working, and there's still a lot of opportunities out there, especially for, you know, people that can work remotely.
Absolutely. And for those companies, especially retail, being able to show on your commercials what you're doing to help with the situation. You know, are you doing curbside pickup? Are you encouraging social distancing in your store? So sharing that through social media, I think, does a lot for your brand. Okay. So as we're starting now to think more about planning for your employees to return now and possibly down the road, there are specific things to talk about. And we were talking yesterday, Lisa has so much great information on this. We could do a whole nother webinar on it. We might do that. But I'm going to hand this portion over to Lisa since this is her area of expertise.
Sure. So in the event that you have furloughed or laid off any employees, there's certainly some different protocols and some different information that you need to be aware about in bringing them back. First is in bringing employees back, what is the type of screening process you can take the employees through in light of COVID-19? So the EEOC and a lot of the state equivalents, so here in California, our state equivalent came out with a list of different protocols for screening applicants through a medical screening process to ensure that you're bringing back individuals that are healthy and not exposing your entire staff to somebody who's coming back into the workplace sick. So the EEOC has a list of frequently asked questions that does provide that you can take an applicant's temperature. Typically, taking the temperature of an individual would be seen as a medical examination, which would not be permissible under the law. But now you can ask the applicant to have their temperature taken. You can ask them if they've had a fever recently. You can ask them if they've been diagnosed with COVID-19. And in the event you have an applicant that you determine actually has COVID-19 or recently had COVID-19, you now are able to disqualify them from returning to work at that time or to delay their start date. Normally that would be looked at as discrimination for a medical condition, but the EEOC, the CDC, and a lot of the state equivalents, even in California, are stating that you can disqualify an applicant in the event they have COVID-19. Another thing to be aware of is the sick leave laws have changed under the Families First Act. In the event that you qualify, you have fewer than 500 employees, You have to be aware of the additional leave that is available to individuals. In addition, check state and local laws to see if the states are coming up with an equivalent. California last week passed a law that applies now to employers with more than 500 employees for anything in the food industry. So that's the restaurants, agricultural positions, warehouses that are moving food. If you have more than 500 employees in California, they now have a right to 80 hours of paid vacation. And unlike Families First, there's not a right to recover that through your taxes. So that is an employer-funded portion of that. And I would fully expect that other states and locations are going to come up with more types of sick leave like that. So for employers with greater than 500 employees, that it's going to expand beyond just the food industry and that it'll expand beyond California. In addition, consider whether or not benefits are reinstated upon returning employees to work. So if you had a furlough versus a layoff, consider whether or not their vacation is still accruing, whether your handbook provides it accrued during an unpaid leave, and whether it's reinstated, depending if it's considered a new employee or a returning employee. A lot of states that provide for paid sick leave have specific requirements on how long that leave of unpaid absence can be for the sick leave to be reinstated. That includes areas such as Pittsburgh, it includes certainly California, and various other areas with paid sick leave, including Michigan. Michigan actually does not require that you reinstate paid sick leave upon rehiring of an employee. And then finally, what do you need to do to make your workplace safe? Obviously, as was stated, this could cover its own session of things that you need to do to get the workplace safe, but do you need to be buying masks? Look at your state and local laws to determine if there's requirements for masks. Look and see if you have to come up with an actual social distancing policy. Here in California and Los Angeles, we have to have social distancing policy for all essential employees. It has to be handed out to every individual going into the workplace, and it has to be posted. And on every entrance to the doors going into that facility, your social distancing policy needs to be posted. So in the event you're considering rehiring back individuals, start to consider getting ready for what it's going to take to bring back those people to the workplace. Whether you need to start finding, how do I buy masks for my entire staff returning to work? And what type of social distancing policies you need to put into place for the workplace.
You know, today there were two interesting categories of employment that are increasing. One of them is HR consultants. I was like, yes, please, right? The second was industrial designers. I know from the time we did the webinar, I think it was last week. Did we do a webinar last week? So since the Two Wills webinar, I know 3 of our clients that have talked about how they're now trying to redesign their offices right now to bring people back at a 6-foot distance. So I think that is an industry that's got a good growth clip coming under it too.
Absolutely.
I do have some questions for you too, Lisa. First off, Elaine, raise your hand if we didn't answer your question, but I think you wanted to know about monthly meetings. I think we addressed that, but if we didn't, just give me a shout out. The Christine, not me, wants to know if we can clone Kevin. Well, you know what? I've been thinking about that for years, to be honest, Kevin. So it comes up the bat. Yeah. Who knows? I mean, everything seems to be coming out of a Michael Crichton, if you remember him, novel these days. So we might be cloning Kevin. You never know. And Brenda is asking, should employees, this is an interesting question, Lisa, should employees file for unemployment if their salary is reduced by 20%, even though they still exceed the max benefit? Their concern is if there is an additional reduction, will their claims be viewed as the original full salary, or will they be viewed differently?
So most states will not allow partial unemployment benefits in the event their pay exceeds the current maximum payout. So like in the state of California, if the employee is already earning more than $450 a week, they wouldn't qualify for any additional benefits. That being said, even here in the state of California, the EDD has encouraged all employees who are experiencing a reduction in pay to at least apply so that they can evaluate and make that determination. They've got their own formulas they plug things into. So it's worth having an employee apply to see if they will qualify for anything, but most likely they will not.
Well, and I know here in New Jersey and in many other states that we're familiar with, if you open a claim, even if denied, it can be considered still open. And it's still something that is easier to reactivate. In other words, it's a claim, it may not be paying, but it's open. Once you close a claim, which they don't usually do here in New Jersey and in some other states I'm thinking of, it takes so long right now to get through that if you've got a claim, don't close it. Bo Roon has a question for us. Sorry if you mentioned this already. We have furloughed a large amount of the team and expect a 2-month furlough. We now have a need to bring back much of the team in about a month, and they're only a month into the furlough. We need to come up with a list of what would qualify as a reason to stay on furlough. We understand that some folks may have adjusted their personal life around the 2-month expectancy. Do you have any guidance here?
So from a legal perspective, there's no problem with informing individuals that they need to come back early. For guidelines on what will qualify to continue to stay on furlough, in the event you have employees that are telling you that they have children that are out of school or they have health considerations, they may still continue to qualify for unemployment even if they were offered to come back to work, depending on those qualifying reasons. What you have to be cautious of, however, is in the event you make offers to individuals to return back to work and they refuse, that could jeopardize their EDD benefits. If the EDD were to learn of it, that they turned down available work and they didn't have a qualifying reason to stay out. There are a limited number of reasons that EDD will approve individuals to stay out or to stop working when work is available. And some of those are in the event they have health conditions, and it's state by state. I know the state of California said if you have a health condition that makes you afraid to go to work, apply and we will evaluate and determine if you're going to qualify for the unemployment benefits. So there are certainly criteria to consider. If you have fewer than 500 employees, and I don't know if you do, but one thing to note is if you bring back individuals whose children are out of school, they would qualify for the Families First Act leave. So you may have individuals you're bringing back and now you're forced to pay the 2/3 of their salary for 12 weeks that you would get reimbursed for, but it's something you'd have to be cautious of as well, just from a cash flow standpoint of knowing that that's a risk, that they may just come back and then go back out again.
Well, I think the reoccurring theme, Kevin, you brought this up yesterday too, is, a lot of us furloughed or laid off thinking, a month, 2 months, and everything keeps changing. So I think what we have to remember is that those employees could very well still be in that headset. So, people sue because of how they feel, not because, to Jess's point, not because it's legitimate or not. But I think this is a particularly tough down cycle where we have to really take into consideration that there's all these other factors. It used to be you get unemployment, right? In this case, you're getting an extra $600. You might have family issues. It's very different than it's ever been. So I think we're all learning as we go along.
And Christine, I think that's where the communication comes in handy as well. So, not my first rodeo on this in aviation. We made certain that we wrote everything to say, you may get called back early. So making certain that was in the rules, if you will, as people went off. But I think even more importantly, by doing those regular updates and letting people know what's going on at the company, they can begin to see it coming. So if their personal circumstances are such that they know that it looks like work's coming back, they can begin to plan for it for when that recall happens. And then, as Lisa said, making certain we fall under the 500 threshold. So making certain that they understand that there are other options, but that we understand that as well, that I might call back Christine, but she's immediately going to go out on family first leave. So I can call back too, to make certain that we cover for that. So, but in my opinion, our opinion, it's just, as you've said over and over again, being transparent so that people aren't surprised. And I think, traditionally, again, in aviation, when these world events happen and we furlough people, they know they're going to be out for 6 months, depending on where they are on a seniority list. And so they're just done with it. This is an ever evolving situation that changes by the day. And so treating it differently and keeping people in the loop, I think, helps manage some of those expectations.
Answering some questions or making sure we've answered them here too. Wow, did we get through all that information? That's amazing. Will, you were asking a question. Did you have something that you wanted to add? No, I guess he's, will let me know. Well, those were some great questions. I hope that we were able to answer more. You will be getting a follow-up email from Zach. There he is. And that'll have a copy of this webinar. So if you feel like you did miss something, and Bo, I think you said you had it cut out, there's more here, more information for you. That'll also supply the deck that Jessica is showing now. There is a plethora of additional data that we could talk about. I think we will start to look at, depending on what we hear back from you, our community, what the next topic will be. I think it is leaning towards, how do we assimilate people back in? What are the steps that we take specifically to do that? Take a little bit deeper dive. We have been circulating a survey, and the survey results I haven't quite gone over with everybody yet. So I thought I might take a minute and do that now. I'd like to see the number of people answering the surveys increase. So I'm just giving a shout out to our own survey. These are questions that the community has been asking us, but I want to make sure everybody knows they come out in our emails, and Zach sends them out too. So if you can respond, they're completely anonymous, but they just help us all in general. So the first 5 questions here we've been asking routinely every week to see the difference. The first one is, are you seeing an increase or decrease in positions? 20% are saying increase, 80% are saying decrease. Currently recruiting for open positions, 60% yes, 40% no. That number has pretty much stayed the same since mid-March, which is interesting. The industries, healthcare has not been responding at all. I cannot imagine why. Information technology and marketing and advertising, 25%. And that number included more, some other specifics. Now other has increased pretty high to 75%. I think that might be indicative, might kind of bolster up what we're hearing about these layoffs now affecting professional services, media, and the public sector. What positions you're recruiting for? Yeah, and here it goes again. Operations is all the way up. So operations is much further up than it was before. That's at 66%. Are you actively doing other tasks? 100% yes. That's interesting. Has your applicant flow, and this is when we keep watching, increased or decreased? Applicant flows at this point on this group are saying they've decreased. 60% are saying they're seeing a decrease in their applicants. Some of that might play to the fact that we are seeing people getting hired that have been laid off. We've seen some of our clients lose talent that was very expensive for them to obtain. So you definitely want to keep your eyes on that one. And that even though the incoming are decreasing, the hiring is coming up. Have you furloughed? This was interesting. We asked the question specifically, have you furloughed? And 40% said yes, 60% said no. And then the next question was, have you laid off employees? And it was the reverse. It was 60 and 40. So it seems like everybody who participated either furloughed or laid off. And do you currently have a buttoned up plan to bring them back? 100% said no. So keep
Very honest.
No, who does? Who could have predicted this? Like I said, Kevin, if you had ever told me, you're going to be talking about furloughs and companies are going to be furloughing. Seriously, I'm not sure I even totally understand the term, but I hope that we all do today. I want to thank you so much for being here, Kevin. Go clone yourself. Lisa, as soon as we get Kevin cloned, we're going to put you right in there with the clone eraser. And of course, the People Science team, I always love seeing you guys, even though I make you see me every day. We miss seeing our community. We miss being together. We hope everybody stays well. Send more questions in. We'll still be answering them. And we always appreciate you attending and appreciate what you had to share with us. Thanks so much.